The Supreme Court has issued a new order in one of the most important Second Amendment Preservation Act cases currently moving through the courts. This case has been building for years, and although the Supreme Court made a decision, the fight is far from finished. Today, I will explain exactly what happened, why the order matters, and what comes next for the Missouri Second Amendment Preservation Act challenge. And before we continue, if you want to support the channel, the best way to do that is simply by subscribing. It helps more than you might realize. This case involves Missouri's Second Amendment Preservation Act, which has been the center of a major legal battle. Missouri passed this law in 2021, stating its own interpretation of the Second Amendment, and restricting how much support, assistance, or funding state officials could give to federal agencies like the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, if those agencies attempted to enforce laws that Missouri believed violated the Second Amendment. The law prevented state officers, government employees, and state agencies from helping federal authorities enforce laws Missouri considered unconstitutional. It even created a civil penalty so that private citizens could sue Missouri officials who cooperated with those federal enforcement actions. The purpose was to shift the power to residents and limit how far Missouri officials could go in supporting the federal government. When the Missouri law was challenged, the United States District Court struck down the entire act. The state appealed that ruling to the United States Court of Appeals for the Eighth Circuit and asked for a temporary stay so the law could remain in effect while the appeal continued. The Eighth Circuit denied that request. Since the state could not get temporary relief from the Eighth Circuit, Missouri went directly to the Supreme Court and requested emergency intervention. At that time, the Supreme Court denied the emergency stay in an 8-1 order. The only justice who would have granted the stay was Justice Clarence Thomas. After that denial, the case went back to the Eighth Circuit for full consideration, and the Eighth Circuit ultimately ruled again in favor of the federal government, striking down the entire Second Amendment Preservation Act. Once the Eighth Circuit issued that ruling, Missouri decided to return to the Supreme Court for a second emergency request. They filed a new petition arguing that the Eighth Circuit's ruling conflicted with long-standing constitutional doctrines. One major argument from Missouri was that the Eighth Circuit admitted the structure and operation of the law were valid under the Constitution, yet they still struck the entire law down because they believed the purpose of the law was to protect the Second Amendment. Missouri explained to the Supreme Court that the Eighth Circuit ignored clear precedent and created a situation where state officials could be sued simply for doing nothing. The Eighth Circuit essentially said that if Missouri officers followed the state law and refused to assist federal authorities, their lack of action counted as action, which made them responsible for enforcement. Missouri argued that this logic completely reversed anti-commandeering principles. During all of this, the Biden administration originally opposed Missouri's law, but the Trump Department of Justice has now taken control of the case. When the case was sent back to the Supreme Court the second time, the Trump Department of Justice delayed its response for months. Eventually, they submitted their reply, and they continued to argue that parts of the Second Amendment Preservation Act are invalid and that the lower court ruling should remain in place. However, the Trump administration also made a surprising statement. They told the Supreme Court that if the court denied emergency review and sent the case back to the lower court, they would voluntarily release parts of the permanent injunction that the Biden administration had previously won. In other words, they signaled that they believed the injunction was too broad and that certain applications of the law might actually be protected under the anti-commandeering doctrine. Missouri responded by telling the Supreme Court that this was the exact reason the court should take the case. They argued that the government's shifting position proved that the issue needed immediate review. Despite that argument, the Supreme Court accepted the Trump administration's request. In the court's recent order list, the justices denied emergency review and sent the case back to the lower court for further proceedings. Even though this denial may seem disappointing, the case is far from over. The Supreme Court's denial does not decide the merits of the law. It only means the court will not intervene at this moment. The case now returns to the United States District Court for the Western District of Missouri, where a full merits decision will eventually be reached. And at that stage, the Trump Department of Justice will have to decide whether it will follow through on the promise it made to the Supreme Court. They said they would release parts of the broad injunction that the Biden administration obtained. If they keep that promise, certain parts of the Second Amendment Preservation Act may be allowed to function while the case continues. The Trump Department of Justice argued that the injunction issued by the lower court was too broad and possibly invalid under the anti-commandeering doctrine because it restricted Missouri from engaging in mere non-enforcement. They expressed concern that the lower court ruling went far beyond what federal law allows and suggested that when the case returns to the lower court, the judgment should be narrowed. The important question now is whether they will actually follow through. If they do, Missouri may regain parts of the law while the final decision is still being litigated. So while the Supreme Court once again declined to intervene in a major Second Amendment case, there is still momentum on Missouri's side. The case is moving forward. There may be partial relief as the Trump administration adjusts the scope of the injunction. And the law will continue working its way toward a full, final decision. As all of this develops and new details come out, I will continue to keep you updated. If you enjoyed this breakdown and want to support the channel, please like, comment, and subscribe. It helps the algorithm and ensures more people see this information. Thank you for watching, and I will keep you informed as this case moves forward.